The Hells Angels biker saw the little girl injured beneath a cracking loft ladder, and his last push bent fate in half. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The storm raged fiercely that night, the wind howling like a living beast. A few miles outside of town, the lights of a modest farmhouse flickered through the darkness, barely holding their ground against the furious elements. Inside, the only sound was the steady rhythm of footsteps, slow and deliberate. A grizzled man in a worn leather jacket, patches from a life long lived in the Hells Angels visible on his back, walked through the narrow hallway, his boots thudding heavily on the old wooden floor. Jake Reaper Morrison was a man who had spent most of his life living by one code: never get involved. As a member of the infamous Hells Angels, that had always been his rule. Stick to your own, keep your distance from the weak, and live by the laws of the road. But tonight, everything was different. He had come to the farmhouse on the edge of town to take shelter from the storm, but what he found inside would change everything. The moment he entered the small living room, he saw her. A little girl, no more than 7 years old, lying on the ground beneath a broken loft ladder. The ladder had cracked under the weight of something, or someone, and had fallen across her, trapping her in place. The girl's face was pale, her body twisted at an unnatural angle, and her small frame was struggling to take each shallow breath. Her arms were pinned beneath the ladder, and her eyes, wide with terror, locked onto Jake's as he stood frozen in the doorway. The harsh light from the flickering bulb above cast shadows on her face, and it was clear she was in excruciating pain. Jake's heart raced as he took in the sight of her. His first instinct was to turn and walk away. It was what he had always done, never get involved. But something in the way she looked at him, the vulnerability in her eyes, stopped him cold. He had never been good with kids, never had much patience for them. But this little girl, lying helpless on the floor, needed him in a way that nothing had ever demanded of him before. He was used to fighting, to running, to escaping. But this was different. Without thinking, Jake crossed the room and knelt beside the girl. He could hear her breath coming in short, panicked gasps, and he gently lifted the ladder off her, wincing as the weight of it shifted. He needed to act fast. The storm outside was still raging, and there was no telling how long it would be before help arrived. As he carefully moved her arm, he felt a sudden surge of something unexpected: fear. He had never been afraid of anything, not in all his years as a biker. But the way this little girl was looking at him, as if she knew he could be her only chance, terrified him. This was not the world he knew. "Hey, it's okay," he whispered, his voice rough from years of shouting over the roar of motorcycles and the crash of bar fights. "I'm not going to hurt you." The girl flinched, her wide eyes filled with suspicion. She didn't trust him, and why should she? A man like him, covered in tattoos, wearing the patch of the Hells Angels. She had every reason to be scared. But there was something in her eyes that made Jake pause. Something in her fear made him want to prove that he could be the one person she could trust. "What's your name?" he asked gently, his rough hands moving slowly to check for any serious injuries. She blinked, tears welling in her eyes, but she didn't speak at first. Finally, her voice, small and shaky, broke the silence. "Emma," she whispered, her words barely audible over the storm outside. Emma. A simple name, yet in that moment, it felt like the most important name Jake had ever heard. He nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. "Okay, Emma. I'm Jake. I'm going to get you out of here. Just hold on." Jake carefully lifted the girl in his arms, wincing as she cried out in pain. She was light, but the way she clung to him, shaking with fear, made the burden feel heavier than any load he had ever carried. The storm outside howled louder, and he knew he had to get her to safety before it was too late. But as he looked down at her, something shifted within him. He wasn't just carrying her to safety. In that moment, he realized he was carrying her through the door to a new life, a life where things could be different. Maybe it was time for him to stop running. I could feel the tension in the air as the storm raged outside, the howl of the wind and the relentless pounding of rain on the roof adding to the urgency of the moment. I was holding Emma tightly, My arms wrapped around her fragile frame as I carefully made my way through the dimly lit hallway of the farmhouse. Her small body shivered in my arms, not just from the cold, but from the pain that was still coursing through her. I could hear her gasping for air, her chest rising and falling in shallow, quick breaths. It was clear that the injury to her leg was more severe than I had initially realized. I needed to get her to safety, and fast. Her breathing was labored, but she was still conscious, her wide eyes locked onto mine, filled with both fear and trust. Her hands gripped my jacket, her fingers trembling. I knew she was scared, but there was something about the way she looked at me that made me want to protect her, to keep her safe. She needed me, and in a way, I needed her too. I had never been a man who could care for others, especially not kids. My life had been one of constant running, always on the move, always alone. The Hells Angels taught me to live by one rule: never get attached. Never let anyone get close enough to hurt you. But holding Emma now, with her life in my hands, I felt a shift deep within me. Maybe this was the reason I had been brought here tonight. Maybe I was meant to protect her, even if it meant breaking every rule I had ever lived by. I moved through the farmhouse, my boots making soft thuds against the old wooden floor as I carried Emma toward the front door. Outside, the storm was getting worse, but I couldn't wait any longer. I needed to get her out of the house before the roof caved in completely. As I stepped outside, the cold air hit me like a wall. The wind was howling, pushing against me with every step, but I pressed on, moving toward the old motorcycle I had left parked in the driveway. I could see it through the heavy rain, its chrome shining faintly in the stormy night. The bike had been my only companion for years, the only thing that had kept me grounded, that had kept me from losing myself completely. But tonight, it wasn't just about the bike. Tonight, it was about Emma. I set her gently on the seat of the motorcycle, adjusting her position so she could hold on to me. I could see the fear in her eyes, the uncertainty of the situation, but she trusted me. She didn't speak, but her grip on my waist tightened as I revved the engine, the sound of the bike roaring to life breaking through the howling wind. The storm was making it nearly impossible to see anything beyond a few feet in front of us, but I pushed forward, my hands gripping the handlebars tightly. Every instinct in me told me to speed up, to get out of there as fast as I could, but I knew better. Emma needed me to be steady. I needed to be steady. I glanced back at her, her small face buried against my back, her hands gripping tightly to me. I could feel her trembling, but I could also feel something else. She was strong, stronger than most people I had met in my life, and in that moment, I knew she was going to be okay. We rode through the storm, the rain beating down on us, the wind pushing us from all sides. It was slow going, but I didn't care. I would ride through anything to make sure she was safe. After what felt like an eternity, we finally reached the small shelter I had planned to take her to. It was a simple place, just an old shack on the outskirts of town, but it was safe. It was the only place I could think of where we wouldn't be disturbed. As I helped Emma off the bike, I could see the exhaustion on her face. She had been through so much, and yet she was still holding on, still fighting. She had been through pain, through fear, and through uncertainty, but she hadn't given up. I wasn't sure if I could say the same about myself. I had lived my life avoiding attachment, avoiding the kind of feelings that could make you weak. But as I looked at Emma, I realized that maybe I wasn't the one who needed saving. Maybe I had been wrong all along. Maybe this little girl, in her own way, had saved me. I had managed to get Emma inside the small shack, away from the storm and the chaos. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, but in here, it was safe. The interior was dimly lit by a single bulb hanging from the ceiling, casting long shadows against the worn wooden walls. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Emma was exhausted, her small body trembling not just from the cold, but from everything she had been through. I knew she needed rest, but I also knew there was no way I could just let her fall asleep and forget about everything. She had been through too much. As I helped her sit down on the old couch, I tried to steady my own breathing. It had been a hell of a ride, both literally and figuratively, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. I had taken the first step, but there was still so much more to face. Emma looked up at me with those wide, trusting eyes, her face pale but determined. She didn't say anything at first, but I could see the question in her eyes. She was scared, but she was also strong. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice softer than I had intended. She nodded slowly, but I could tell she was holding something back. I could see it in the way her small fingers clutched at the edge of the blanket I had draped over her. She was trying to be brave, but I knew better than anyone that you could only be brave for so long before the weight of everything would crush you. I sat down next to her, trying to make myself as small as possible so I wouldn't scare her. "You're safe now," I said, trying to offer her the comfort I never allowed myself. She glanced up at me, her eyes searching my face as if trying to figure out if she could trust me. I wasn't the most trustworthy person in the world. Hell, I didn't trust anyone, not even myself. But Emma had no reason not to trust me, at least not yet. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice so small it was barely audible. "You saved me." Her words hit me harder than I expected. I had saved her, but in a way, she had saved me too. I had spent my whole life running from everything, my past, my emotions, even my own self. But holding her now, knowing I had done something good, made me realize that maybe I wasn't as lost as I had always believed. "You're welcome," I said, not sure what else to say. I wanted to tell her everything would be okay, but I couldn't make promises I wasn't sure I could keep. All I could do was be here now, in this moment, and protect her for as long as I could. The silence between us stretched out, comfortable yet heavy with unspoken words. I didn't know what to do next. I had no plan, no idea how to fix things. But I knew one thing for sure, I wasn't going anywhere. She needed me, and for the first time in a long while, I wasn't going to leave. Just as I thought I might be able to take a breath, the sound of motorcycles cut through the stillness outside. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that sound. It was a sound I had spent years ignoring, trying to outrun. But now, with Emma sitting beside me, it filled me with a sense of dread. I stood up quickly, my instincts kicking in. "Stay here," I told her firmly. "Don't move, no matter what." Emma looked up at me, confusion in her eyes, but I didn't have time to explain. I had to figure out who was outside, and fast. The last thing I wanted was for her to get caught up in whatever was coming. I moved to the window, peeking through the curtains, my heart pounding in my chest. I saw them. For bikes, their headlights cutting through the darkness like predators circling their prey. The men riding them were all wearing the same patches, Hell's Angels. My brothers. I cursed under my breath. They had no reason to be here, not tonight. They should have known I was out of the game, that I wanted nothing more to do with the club. But there they were, showing up at the worst possible time. I couldn't let them in, not with Emma here. The last thing she needed was to be caught in the middle of my mess. I turned back to her, my mind racing. "Stay quiet. Don't make a sound," I ordered. Her eyes widened, and I could see the fear creeping back into her face. I hated seeing that look on her, but I couldn't help it. The reality of the situation was sinking in. I wasn't just protecting her from a broken ladder or a storm anymore. I was protecting her from the very thing that had defined my life for too long. The club. I couldn't let them find her. Not now. Not ever. I moved toward the door, my hand hovering near the knob as I listened to the sound of the bikes growing louder. It was now or never. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was coming next. I stood frozen, my hand gripping the door handle as the roar of the motorcycles grew louder. I could hear the low growl of the engines, a sound that sent a chill down my spine. The Hell's Angels. I hadn't expected them to show up, especially not tonight. My mind raced, every instinct telling me to keep them out. I couldn't let them find Emma. Not now, not after everything that had happened. I had spent my entire life avoiding the club's pull, but here I was, caught in the middle of it again. I glanced back at Emma, who was sitting on the couch, her eyes wide with fear. I could see the confusion in her face, and I hated that she had to be scared again. I moved quickly, closing the door softly behind me as I stepped into the small, dimly lit hallway. My heart was pounding in my chest, my pulse quickening with every second that passed. I didn't know what they wanted, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let them hurt her. The men outside weren't just some random riders, they were my brothers, or at least they had been. Jake, Reaper, Morrison didn't just walk away from the Hell's Angels. But I had. And now, they were here, looking for something I wasn't willing to give them anymore. I crept quietly to the window, careful not to let them see me. I peeked through the cracks in the curtains, my eyes narrowing as I saw the men dismounting from their bikes. They were all wearing the same patch, Hell's Angels, the familiar skull and wings staring back at me. I recognized them immediately. Steele, the president of the chapter, was in the front, his broad shoulders filling the space like a wall. Behind him were 3 other members, their faces hardened by years of loyalty to the club. I knew them well. Too well. They had been my family for years, but now, they felt like strangers. My chest tightened as I watched them move toward the door. I had to do something. I had no idea what they wanted, but I couldn't let them find Emma. I had to protect her. I stepped back from the window and turned to face her. She was sitting there, still as a statue, her hands gripping the blanket tightly. Her eyes met mine, and I could see the fear in them. I couldn't bear it. She was just a little girl. She didn't deserve any of this. I had no choice. I had to get her out of here. I moved quickly, my hands shaking as I helped her stand up. "We need to go," I said quietly, trying to keep my voice calm. She didn't ask any questions, just nodded and let me guide her to the back door. I knew the woods behind the shack would give us some cover, but we had to move fast. I wasn't sure how much time we had, but I wasn't going to stick around to find out. The sound of boots on the porch made my stomach churn. I could hear their voices now, low and threatening. They were close. Too close. I pulled Emma toward the door, my mind racing. The door creaked as I opened it, and we stepped outside into the cold night air. The storm was still raging, the wind howling in our faces. I pushed forward, my hand on Emma's back, guiding her through the darkness. I couldn't stop thinking about the danger. We were in. The Hells Angels were dangerous, no matter how much I wanted to deny it. And now, they were here, on my doorstep, and I was about to drag a little girl into the middle of it all. We moved quickly, keeping to the shadows as we headed into the woods. The rain was falling in sheets, soaking us to the bone, but I didn't care. I had to get Emma away from them. I had to keep her safe. As we moved deeper into the trees, I glanced back once, just to make sure we weren't being followed. The house was barely visible now, hidden by the thick trees and the heavy rain. But I could still hear their voices, growing fainter, and I knew we had a little more time. I turned to Emma, who was walking beside me, her small face pale and tired. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice soft. She nodded, but I could see the exhaustion in her eyes. I hated that she had to go through all of this, that she had to witness the mess I had made of my life. But I wasn't going to let her down. Not now. Not ever. We kept moving, our footsteps barely audible over the sound of the storm. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me, and I knew I couldn't keep running forever. Eventually, I was going to have to face my past and face the consequences of leaving the Hells Angels behind. But for now, all that mattered was getting Emma to safety. As we walked deeper into the woods, I knew we had to keep moving. The night was far from over, and the storm was far from done. But I wasn't going to stop. Not until Emma was safe. I could feel the cold biting through my jacket as we moved deeper into the woods. The storm had been relentless, the rain soaking us to the bone. But the real danger wasn't the weather. It was the Hells Angels and the chaos they brought with them. Emma was walking beside me, her small figure barely visible in the heavy downpour. I kept my hand on her shoulder, guiding her through the trees, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The last thing I wanted was for us to be found out here. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig underfoot felt like a threat. The night was dark, the storm swallowing up any light from the distant farmhouse, but I could hear their motorcycles, their engines growling in the distance. They were still out there, hunting. My heart was pounding in my chest, the pressure of the situation building with each passing second. I had no idea what they wanted, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let them find Emma. I glanced over at her, seeing the exhaustion on her face. She was trying to keep up, but the night had been hard on her. She was so small, and this was so much for her to handle. I hated that she had to go through this, but there was nothing I could do except keep moving forward. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with silent questions. I could tell she was scared, but she didn't say anything. She didn't have to. I could see it in the way she clung to me. I couldn't blame her. I wasn't sure what I was doing anymore, but I knew I had to protect her. I had spent so many years running from my past, but now it was catching up to me. The Hells Angels had always been my family, but I had walked away, and now they were looking for me. And if they found me, they would find Emma too. The sound of the motorcycles grew louder, closer, and I felt a knot form in my stomach. The last thing I wanted was for them to catch us out here. I needed to get Emma somewhere safe, somewhere the club couldn't reach us. We were too exposed, too vulnerable. My mind raced as I scanned the forest around us. There had to be a way out. There had to be somewhere we could go. I spotted a small cabin in the distance, barely visible through the trees, its windows dimly lit. It wasn't much, but it would be better than staying out in the open. Emma, follow me, I said quietly, my voice rough from the tension. She nodded, her steps quickening to match mine as I led her toward the cabin. The rain was coming down harder now, the wind howling like a freight train, but we pushed forward, the cabin getting closer with every step. My heart was racing, but I tried to steady my breath. We had to make it. As we reached the cabin, I gently pushed open the door. It creaked loudly in protest, and I winced, glancing over my shoulder to make sure no one had heard us. The last thing we needed was to draw attention. The interior was sparse, a few pieces of old furniture scattered around. It wasn't much, but it was shelter. It was safe. I closed the door behind us and locked it, my eyes scanning the room for anything useful. There was a small fireplace in the corner, some firewood stacked nearby. I immediately went to work, building a fire to warm us up. Emma sat down on the worn couch, her small frame hunched with exhaustion. I could see the weight of everything bearing down on her. She had been through so much already, and I hated that I couldn't give her anything more than this. A few minutes later, the fire was crackling, sending warmth into the room. I walked over to Emma and sat beside her, trying to offer her some comfort. "You're safe here," I said, my voice low. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with that same trust and fear. I could see she wanted to believe me, but she was just a kid, and this was all too much for her. "I know you're scared," I continued, "but we're going to get through this. I won't let anything happen to you." She nodded, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. She was scared, and she had every right to be. The Hell's Angels weren't just going to let me walk away. I had made a choice, and now I was paying the price. But Emma, she didn't deserve any of this. I had to keep her safe. I had to figure out a way to get us out of here, to keep her out of harm's way. I sat there for a few minutes, my mind racing with thoughts of what to do next. The sound of the motorcycles outside still lingered in my ears, like a constant reminder that we weren't safe. I knew we couldn't stay here long. I had to get us somewhere else, somewhere they wouldn't find us. But for now, this small cabin would have to do. "Stay here," I told Emma softly. "I'll figure out what to do next." I stood up and walked to the window, peeking through the curtains. The storm was still raging, and I couldn't see much beyond the trees, but I knew the danger wasn't over. The club was out there, looking for me, looking for us, and I wasn't sure how long we had before they found us. The thought made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to think, and I had to think fast. I stood by the window, the dim light from the crackling fire casting long shadows on the walls. My eyes were fixed on the dark silhouette of the trees outside, my mind racing. The storm outside seemed to have picked up speed, but that wasn't what had my heart pounding. It was the motorcycles. I could still hear their engines in the distance, a low rumble that shook the air. Every part of me wanted to believe they were gone, that the storm had kept them away. But deep down I knew better. The Hell's Angels were still out there, and they weren't going to give up so easily. I glanced over at Emma, who was sitting quietly on the couch, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. She was trying to be brave, but I could see the fear in her face, in the way her small hands clutched the blanket around her. She had been through so much, and all I could offer her was this. A tiny shack, shelter from the storm. It wasn't much, but it had to be enough. I walked over to her, sitting down beside her on the couch. She looked up at me, her face pale from the shock, but there was something else in her eyes. A quiet trust. I could see it in the way she didn't pull away when I sat next to her, in the way she watched me with those big brown eyes that held more wisdom than a child her age should have. I didn't have all the answers, but in that moment, I realized that I had something. A chance to protect her, to give her something better than what she had known before. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to steady my thoughts. There was no plan, no escape, but I couldn't let her feel that. She needed to know that no matter what happened next, I would be there for her. I could hear the motorcycles getting closer now, the sound unmistakable. I could feel the tension building inside me, the old familiar fear creeping back into my bones. I had spent my whole life running from the past, from the things I had done, from the people I had hurt. But tonight, that wasn't what mattered. What mattered was Emma. I looked at her again, her face still uncertain, but there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. She was waiting for me to make a decision, waiting for me to figure out what came next. I stood up, moving toward the small table in the corner of the room, where I had left my jacket. My fingers brushed over the leather, feeling the weight of it, the weight of the past that I had carried with me for so long. It had always been a part of me. The Hells Angels had been my family, my brothers. But now, standing here with Emma, I realized that I didn't need them anymore. I didn't need the club to define who I was. I turned back to Emma, trying to put on a brave face. "We're going to be okay," I said, my voice rougher than I intended. She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty still lingering in her eyes. I wasn't sure if she believed me, but I had to believe it for both of us. I walked to the window again, my eyes scanning the dark landscape. The rain was still pouring down, the wind howling like an angry animal. But through the storm, I saw something. A light. Faint, but unmistakable. It was moving quickly. I could see the headlights of a motorcycle cutting through the darkness, followed by another, and then another. They were getting closer. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't have time to think. I grabbed Emma's hand, pulling her up from the couch. "Come on, we need to move," I said, my voice urgent. She stood up quickly, her small hand slipping into mine as I led her toward the back door. I didn't know where we were going. All I knew was that we couldn't stay here, not with them closing in on us. We stepped out into the cold night, the rain drenching us instantly. But we didn't stop. We couldn't stop. We moved quickly, staying close to the trees, my eyes darting around, searching for any sign of the motorcycles. The light from the headlights was getting brighter, and I could hear the engines getting louder. They were almost here. I glanced down at Emma, her small figure barely visible in the dark, but I could feel her there, beside me, trusting me to get us through this. We reached the edge of the woods, and I spotted a small cabin in the distance, hidden behind a line of trees. It wasn't much, but it was a place to hide, a place to regroup. We ran toward it, our footsteps muffled by the rain-soaked ground. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The motorcycles were right behind us now, their engines roaring as they approached the clearing. I could see the shadows of the riders, their figures outlined against the rain-soaked sky. But we were almost there. We reached the cabin just as the first rider broke through the trees, his motorcycle cutting through the darkness like a predator closing in on its prey. I pushed open the door of the cabin, my heart racing as I pulled Emma inside. We were safe for now, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they found us. And when they did, I would have to make my stand. For Emma. For both of us. I could hear the motorcycles closing in, the thunderous sound of engines shaking the very air around me. I pressed Emma against the wall of the small cabin, my hand over her mouth to keep her quiet. My heart was pounding in my chest, each beat matching the rhythm of the bikes outside. The door creaked slightly as the wind howled against it, but we couldn't risk making any sound. I knew the Hells Angels weren't going to let me walk away easily. They were searching for me, for us, and it wouldn't be long before they found this place. I had no idea how much time we had, but I wasn't going to let them take Emma. I moved to the window, peering through the heavy rain and the thick darkness. I could make out the figures of the riders, their motorcycles cutting through the night like predators closing in on their prey. They were just outside, their lights, casting long shadows across the clearing. I held my breath, watching them. I had left the club, walked away from the life I had known, but now they were here, and I was about to have to face them. I wasn't scared of them. Hell, I had fought alongside them for years, but now, with Emma here, things were different. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for her. "Stay here," I whispered to Emma, my voice barely audible over the sound of the rain. She nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but she didn't make a sound. I could see the trust in her eyes, and it was a weight I wasn't sure I was ready to carry. I turned away from the window and moved to the back door, my footsteps slow and deliberate. I had to be careful. I couldn't let them know we were inside. I had to think, and I had to think fast. The door was old, the wood weathered and worn, but it still held strong. I pressed my ear against it, listening for any sign that they had heard us. The bikes had stopped, the sound of engines silencing for a moment. I could hear voices now, low and threatening, their words carried by the wind. They were searching for me, and I could hear the anger in their voices. They weren't going to leave until they found me. I moved back toward Emma, my mind racing. I needed to get her out of here. But how? I couldn't take her through the woods again, not with the storm and the club right on our heels. But I had no choice. We had to move. I grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her to her feet, my fingers tightening around hers. She didn't protest, just followed my lead, her small hand gripping mine with a strength that surprised me. We moved quietly through the cabin, staying close to the walls, avoiding the creaks in the floorboards that seemed to betray our every movement. The cabin was small, but it felt like a maze in the dark. We reached the back door, and I hesitated for a moment, my mind running through every possible escape route. The storm was still raging outside, and the night was pitch black, but I had no idea how much longer we could stay hidden. I pushed open the door just a crack, peering out into the rain-soaked darkness. I couldn't see them, but I knew they were close. Too close. I closed the door softly and turned back to Emma. "We're going to have to move fast," I told her, my voice steady, though I could feel the tension tightening in my chest. "Stay close to me, and don't make a sound." She nodded again, her eyes filled with determination. I wasn't sure if she understood the danger, but she trusted me, and that was enough. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to come. The cabin was our last chance, but I knew the Hells Angels wouldn't give up until they had found me. I was ready to fight, to run, to do whatever it took to protect Emma. But the truth was, I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if we could outrun the club or if they would find us, but I knew one thing. I would die before I let them hurt her. We moved quickly through the storm, staying low and staying quiet. The rain was coming down in sheets now, and the wind was whipping around us, making it harder to see. But I kept my eyes forward, focused on the task at hand. We had to make it to safety. We had to get away from them. I could hear the sound of the motorcycles starting again in the distance, the engines roaring to life. They were coming, and they wouldn't stop until they found us. We had to keep moving. But as I glanced back at Emma, I saw the fear in her eyes again. She was terrified. I couldn't blame her. This wasn't the life she had imagined. This wasn't the life any child should have to live. But it was the life I had dragged her into, and I wasn't going to let her down. I squeezed her hand a little tighter, and we moved faster. The storm was still fierce, but I was determined to keep us both safe. We pushed on through the rain, into the night, toward whatever came next. I had no idea how long we had been running, but it felt like hours. The storm had swallowed the night, the wind roaring louder and louder, the rain blurring everything around us. Emma was still holding my hand tightly, her small fingers cold but firm, a silent show of trust one wasn't sure I deserved. The fear in her eyes was still there, but she was moving with purpose now, staying close to me. Every step we took through the thick mud and tangled underbrush brought us farther from the cabin, and farther from whatever was lurking out there in the storm. I could hear the motorcycles again, the low rumble of the engines cutting through the rain. They were still searching for us. The sounds were closer now, cutting through the wet, dark night like a predator drawing nearer to its prey. My heart raced as I pushed forward, urging Emma to keep up. I could hear her soft, quick breaths behind me, the rhythm of her footsteps matching mine as we moved deeper into the woods. There was no path, no clear way forward, just trees, mud, and rain. But I kept moving, driven by something I couldn't quite explain. Was it the need to protect her? Or was it something else? Maybe it was just the idea that I couldn't go back, that I couldn't let this life pull me back in. The Hells Angels had been my family once, but they didn't own me anymore. And I wasn't going to let them take Emma, not when she had already lost so much. We kept moving, not stopping, not looking back. I could hear the bikes again, their engines growing louder, closer, but I didn't dare glance over my shoulder. I needed to stay focused. The rain was coming down harder now, almost blinding, and the ground beneath us was slick with mud. Every step was more dangerous than the last, but we had to keep moving. Almost there, I whispered to Emma, though I wasn't sure she could hear me over the storm. She didn't respond, but I could feel her small hand tightening around mine, her steps steady, though slow. I knew she was tired. Hell, we both were. But we couldn't stop. Not now. Not when they were so close. We pushed through the trees, the darkness swallowing us whole, until I saw it. A small clearing ahead, just visible through the downpour. The faint glow of a light. A house. A real house this time. I could feel my heart skip a beat, the possibility of safety just within reach. The house was small, weathered, tucked away between the trees like a secret hiding in the storm. I didn't know who lived there or if they'd be willing to help us, but I didn't have any other choice. We had to get there. Stay close. I muttered to Emma, pulling her along with me as we made our way through the last few yards of forest. The bikes were getting closer. I could hear their engines, louder than ever, cutting through the rain. I quickened my pace, my legs aching from the hours of running, but I couldn't stop. Not yet. As we reached the edge of the clearing, I heard something, a snap of a twig, a shift in the wind. I froze, my heart racing. They were here. I turned to Emma, her eyes wide, her body shaking, and I crouched down, pulling her close to me. We're almost there, I whispered urgently, trying to calm her, though I could feel my own nerves tightening in my chest. She nodded, her face pale but determined. She wasn't going to give up, and I wasn't going to let her down. The motorcycles were right behind us now, their engines roaring louder, and I knew we didn't have much time. I reached for the door of the house, my hand shaking as I gripped the knob. I pushed it open slowly, the creaking of the wood almost too loud, but I didn't care. We had to get inside. We had to hide. As we stepped inside, I breathed a sigh of relief. The storm was still howling outside, but at least we were safe, for now. I closed the door quietly behind us and locked it, my eyes scanning the room. It was small but warm, the soft glow of a fire flickering in the corner. There was a couch, an old chair, and a small table by the window. Nothing fancy, but it would do. I turned to Emma, who was still clinging to my side, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "Stay here," I told her softly. "I'm going to check the windows, make sure we're not being followed." She nodded, though I could see the worry still in her eyes. I hated seeing her like that. I hated that I couldn't give her more than this, safety for now, but no guarantee of what came next. I moved quickly to the window, pulling the curtain aside just enough to peek outside. The storm was still relentless, the darkness almost complete. But I could hear the bikes, their engines snarling in the distance. I didn't know how much longer we had before they found us. The thought made my chest tighten, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had to protect Emma, no matter what. I turned back to her, seeing the fear in her face. "You're safe now," I said, though I didn't believe it myself. I wasn't sure what was coming next, but I wasn't about to give up. Not now. Not with Emma depending on me. We would make it through this. Somehow. I stood by the window, my eyes scanning the rain-soaked landscape outside. The sound of the motorcycles was getting louder, the engines revving in the distance. They were closing in, and I didn't know how much longer we had before they found us. My heart was pounding in my chest as I turned back to Emma, still sitting quietly on the couch, her small body wrapped in a blanket. She was staring out the window, her eyes distant, as if she were trying to understand everything that had happened. I couldn't blame her. I wasn't sure I understood any of it either. The Hell's Angels were closing in, and I knew they wouldn't stop until they found me. They had always been my family, but I had walked away. I had made that decision years ago, and now it was coming back to haunt me. But this time, it wasn't just me they were after. It was Emma, too, and I wasn't going to let that happen. I had to protect her, no matter what. I walked over to Emma, sitting down beside her on the couch. She looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with so many questions I didn't have the answers to. I reached out and took her hand, holding it tightly. "We're going to be okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "We'll figure this out." She nodded, though I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe me. How could she? She was just a kid, and everything around her was falling apart. She had been through so much already, and I couldn't help but feel responsible for dragging her into this mess. I couldn't protect her from everything, but I would do everything I could to keep her safe now. I stood up, pacing the small room as my mind raced. The motorcycles were still out there, but they hadn't come for us yet. They were circling, waiting. I needed to make a plan, but I couldn't think straight. The only thing I knew was that we couldn't stay here. Not with the club so close. I walked over to the door, peeking out through the crack in the curtain. I could see the headlights of the motorcycles through the trees, their figures moving in the storm. They weren't far. I turned back to Emma, my heart heavy with the weight of the decision I had to make. "Emma," I said, my voice firm, "we need to go? Now." Her eyes widened in fear, and she looked toward the door. "But where will we go?" she asked, her voice small. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know where we could go. All I knew was that we couldn't stay here. I grabbed my jacket, throwing it on quickly before reaching for the door. I glanced back at Emma, who was already standing, her small figure trembling. She was scared, but she didn't hesitate. She trusted me, and that was all I needed. I opened the door slowly, stepping out into the storm. The rain hit me like a wall, but I didn't care. I had to keep moving. I could feel Emma's small hand gripping mine, her body close to mine as we walked through the thick mud and underbrush. The woods were thick, the trees towering above us like silent sentinels, their branches swaying in the wind. It was hard to see, the storm making everything a blur of dark shapes and shadows. I kept moving, one step after the other, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The motorcycles were still out there, their engines revving, and I could hear them getting closer. The sound of the rain and wind was drowning them out, but I knew they were coming for us. We couldn't outrun them forever. Stay close, I told Emma, my voice low. She nodded, her small fingers gripping my hand tighter. I could feel her fear, but I could also feel her determination. She wasn't going to give up. Not now. We kept moving through the storm, pushing forward into the unknown. I didn't know where we were going, but I knew we had to keep moving. We couldn't stop. Not yet. The sound of the motorcycles was getting louder now, almost deafening. I glanced behind us, my heart racing. I couldn't see them yet, but I knew they were close. Hurry, I muttered, urging Emma to keep up. She was slowing down, her small legs struggling to keep pace. I could see the exhaustion in her face, the fear still lingering in her eyes. I wasn't sure how much longer she could go on. We're almost there, I said, trying to reassure her, even though I wasn't sure myself. We moved faster, my legs aching with every step, but I didn't stop. We couldn't stop. The sound of the bikes was almost deafening now, the growl of their engines vibrating through the ground. They were almost on us. I could hear their voices in the distance, the deep rumble of Steele's voice leading the pack. He was close. Too close. I glanced to the left and saw a small shack in the distance, barely visible through the rain. It wasn't much, but it was something. A place to hide, at least for a while. This way, I said, tugging on Emma's hand, leading her toward the shack. We had to get inside. It was our only chance. I could feel the cold wind cutting through my jacket as we made our way toward the shack. The rain was relentless, a constant downpour that made everything slippery and treacherous. My heart was racing, each step through the mud and muck feeling like it was taking forever. Emma was struggling to keep up, her small frame barely visible beside me, but I could feel her hand in mine, steady and determined. She was scared, I could see it in her eyes, but she wasn't giving up. Neither was I. We had reached the shack, a small, weathered building that looked like it hadn't seen anyone in years. The roof was sagging in places, and the windows were covered in grime, but it was shelter. We didn't have much time. I glanced behind us once more, hearing the roar of motorcycles getting closer. They were almost here. We couldn't stay out in the open. I pushed open the door of the shack, the old wood creaking loudly as it gave way. The interior was dark and musty, but at least it was dry. I stepped inside, pulling Emma along with me, and closed the door behind us, pressing my back against it to make sure it was secure. The wind howled outside, but in here, it was eerily silent. We were safe for the moment, but I knew it wouldn't last long. I looked around the room, trying to make sense of the space. It was small, with only a few old crates and a broken table. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting dim light across the room. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I turned back to Emma, who was standing in the center of the room, her small body trembling. She looked exhausted, her clothes soaked through, her face pale. She had been through so much already, and I could see the weight of it all in her eyes. "You okay?" I asked quietly, walking over to her. She nodded, but her eyes said it all. She wasn't okay. None of this was okay. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, checking the battery. It was low, but I had enough to make one call. I had to get us out of here. We couldn't stay hidden forever. I dialed the number, my thumb hovering over the screen. The call connected, and I heard the familiar voice on the other end. "Jake, what's going on?" It was Johnny, one of the few members of the Hells Angels I still trusted. "They're close," I said, my voice low. "They're looking for me. For us." I glanced over at Emma, who was sitting on the floor, hugging her knees to her chest. "I need help. We need to get out of here." There was a pause on the other end. "Where are you?" Johnny asked. I gave him the location, my heart racing as I spoke. I didn't know if he'd be able to get to us in time, but it was the only chance we had. "Stay put. We'll be there soon," Johnny said, before hanging up. I put the phone away and turned to Emma. She was staring at the door, her eyes wide with fear. I walked over to her, kneeling down in front of her. "It's going to be okay," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "We're going to get out of here, I promise." She nodded, but I could see the uncertainty in her eyes. She didn't believe me. She couldn't. I didn't even know if I believed myself. The Hell's Angels were closing in, and we were running out of time. I stood up and walked to the window, peeking through the grime-covered glass. The rain was coming down harder now, but I could still make out the silhouettes of the motorcycles in the distance, their headlights cutting through the storm like predators on the hunt. They were close. Too close. I turned back to Emma, my heart pounding in my chest. "We need to stay quiet," I said. "Stay low and don't make a sound." She nodded, but I could see the fear in her eyes. She didn't understand, not completely, but she knew enough to trust me. I wasn't sure if that was a good thing or not. The motorcycles were getting closer, and I could hear the roar of the engines growing louder. I took a deep breath and moved toward the back of the shack, checking the door. It was still secure, but I knew that wouldn't hold them for long. The sound of the bikes grew louder, the engines almost deafening now. They were almost here. My heart was pounding in my chest as I glanced at Emma one last time. "Stay here," I said, my voice steady. "I'll keep them away." Emma's eyes widened in panic. "No, don't leave me." I kneeled down next to her, taking her hand in mine. "I'll be right back," I said, my voice low. "Just stay here. Don't open the door for anyone, no matter what." She nodded, her hand tightening around mine, and I could feel her trembling. I didn't want to leave her. I didn't want to do this alone, but I knew I had no choice. The Hell's Angels were coming, and I was the only one who could stop them. I turned away, heading for the door, my hand gripping the old wooden handle. I had to buy us time. I had to keep Emma safe. I stepped outside into the storm, the rain hitting me like ice as I walked toward the trees. I could hear the motorcycles getting closer. They were almost here. This was it. I stepped outside into the storm, the cold rain slicing through the air. Like needles. My boots sank into the mud as I moved toward the tree line, the heavy roar of the motorcycles growing louder with each passing second. I could feel the pounding of my own heart, the adrenaline pushing me forward, despite the fear gnawing at my insides. I didn't know how much time I had, but I knew I couldn't let them find Emma. Not like this. I had to keep them distracted. I had to buy us time. I pulled my jacket tighter around me, the leather soaked through with the relentless rain. The wind howled, the sound of the storm making it harder to hear anything else, but I knew the bikes were getting closer. I had to be ready. The trees around me were thick, their branches swaying violently in the wind, but they offered no real cover. I could see the headlights of the motorcycles cutting through the darkness, their figures outlined against the storm. They were almost here. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. I couldn't let fear take over. Not now. Not with Emma depending on me. I kept moving, ducking behind a large oak tree, my eyes scanning the area for any sign of the riders. The engines roared as they got closer, and I could hear their voices now, low and gruff, shouting orders. I knew they were looking for me, but I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I couldn't let them get any closer to the shack. I had to keep them away from Emma. I could hear the crunch of tires on wet leaves, and I knew they were just outside the clearing. My heart raced, the tension in my chest threatening to burst. I peeked around the tree, watching as the headlights of the motorcycles came into full view. There were 4 of them, the riders dressed in their familiar leather jackets, their faces hidden behind their helmets. They were scanning the area, looking for any sign of movement. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't see me. I had to stay hidden. I had to stay calm. One of the riders veered off from the group, his motorcycle coming closer to the shack. I didn't know if he was just scouting or if he had spotted something, but I wasn't about to wait around to find out. I moved quickly, my boots squelching in the mud as I circled behind the tree, keeping my body low. I needed to get closer. I needed to find a way to get their attention and lead them away from Emma. The sound of the rain and the wind masked my movements, but it also worked against me. The storm was so intense now, I could barely see my hand in front of my face. The darkness seemed to close in around me, making it harder to stay focused. But I couldn't afford to lose my focus. I crept through the underbrush, careful to keep my footsteps as silent as possible. The rider had stopped near the shack, his bike idling as he scanned the area. I had to act fast. I knew that if I didn't make a move now, it would be too late. I reached into my pocket, pulling out the small flashlight I had been carrying. The beam of light was weak, barely cutting through the rain, but it was enough to catch the rider's attention. I flicked the switch, sending the light into the air. The rider looked in my direction, his head tilting slightly as he saw the brief flash. I didn't wait to see if he was coming after me. I bolted into the trees, running as fast as I could, hoping the noise of the storm would cover my tracks. I could hear him rev the engine behind me, the roar of the motorcycle growing louder. I pushed myself harder, my legs burning, but I had to keep moving. The rider was gaining on me, but I wasn't going to let him catch me. I had to get back to the shack, to Emma. I could feel the cold air in my lungs, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I darted through the trees. I could see the faint glow of the shack through the rain, but I wasn't sure if the rider had fallen behind or if he was right on my tail. I reached the clearing again, my eyes scanning the shadows. The bikes were still out there, but I couldn't hear the rider anymore. Had he given up? Was he waiting for me? I didn't know, but I wasn't going to take any chances. I made my way back to the shack, my footsteps muffled by the rain-soaked ground. I could see Emma's silhouette through the window, sitting in the same spot where I had left her, but she was still there, still waiting. I pushed open the door quietly, my body aching with exhaustion. Emma looked up as I entered, her eyes wide with concern. "Are they gone?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded, though I wasn't sure if I was telling the truth. The storm was still raging outside, and I had no idea if they were gone for good. But I couldn't afford to waste time. I had to get us out of here. We couldn't stay in this shack forever. I moved toward her, taking her hand again. "We're going to be okay," I said, my voice steady, though the uncertainty in my heart said otherwise. "But we need to keep moving. We can't stay here." She nodded without a word, her small fingers tightening around mine. She was scared, but she was still with me, and that was all that mattered. I could feel my heart racing as we moved through the storm, my hand tightly gripping Emma's as we navigated through the dense forest. The rain poured relentlessly, and the wind howled, making it nearly impossible to hear anything beyond the roar of the storm. The motorcycles had stopped, but the sound of their engines still echoed in my head. I knew they weren't far. I could still feel the tension in my chest, the weight of the situation pressing down on me with every step we took. We had to keep moving. We couldn't afford to stop. The shack was behind us now, and I knew we couldn't return there. The Hells Angels were still out there, looking for us, and they wouldn't stop until they found me. I had left the club, but I couldn't outrun my past. And now, it was coming for me, and it was dragging Emma into it. The thought of what could happen to her if they found us made my stomach churn. I wasn't going to let that happen. Not on my watch. I glanced down at Emma, who was walking beside me, her small form barely visible in the darkness. She was holding onto me tightly, her fingers trembling, but she wasn't crying. She wasn't complaining. She was just following me, trusting me to lead her through the storm. It broke my heart to know she was scared, but I was proud of her too. She was stronger than anyone I had ever met. She had been through so much already, and yet she kept going. We kept walking, moving deeper into the woods, my mind racing with thoughts of where to go next. The storm was making everything more difficult, the rain blurring everything around us, but I had to keep going. I had no idea where we were headed, but I knew we had to find shelter. And fast. I glanced back over my shoulder, half expecting to see the headlights of the motorcycles cutting through the trees, but I couldn't see anything. The rain had made everything a blur, and I didn't want to take any chances. I pulled Emma closer, trying to shield her from the worst of the storm. "Stay close," I said softly, my voice steady despite the panic I felt building inside me. She nodded, her hand gripping mine tighter. We kept walking, not stopping, not looking back. Every step we took brought us farther away from the shack, but it also brought us closer to whatever was waiting for us out there. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew I had to be ready. The wind howled louder, the rain coming down in sheets, and I could feel the pressure building inside me. I needed to get us out of this storm, away from the Hells Angels. But I had no idea where to go. No plan. I had always lived my life on the road, moving from place to place, but I had never felt this lost before. The world felt like it was closing in on me, and I had no control. But Emma needed me. I couldn't let her down. The storm was starting to let up a little, but I still couldn't see anything clearly. The darkness was all-encompassing, the trees blocking out any light from the sky. I was getting disoriented, my thoughts scattered. I couldn't afford to lose focus. We needed to find a way out, and fast. I turned to Emma, seeing the fear in her eyes. She was scared, but she was still with me. She hadn't given up. I had to find a way to protect her. I had to keep moving. Come on, I said, my voice a little more urgent now. We need to find somewhere safe. She nodded, her hand still holding mine tightly, and we kept walking. I wasn't sure how much further we could go, but I had to keep pushing forward. The sound of the motorcycles was still there, in the back of my mind, a constant reminder that we weren't safe. They were looking for us, and I had to keep Emma hidden. I looked around, trying to spot any sign of shelter, anything that could give us a chance. The forest seemed endless, and the darkness made everything feel like it was closing in on us. But then I saw it. A faint light in the distance. A cabin. It was small, just visible through the trees, but it was enough. A place to hide. A place to regroup. There, I said, pointing to the light. We're almost there. Emma looked up at me, her face filled with hope, and we quickened our pace, moving toward the cabin. It was still a long way off, but it was the only chance we had. The motorcycles were still out there, but the light from the cabin gave me a sense of direction, something to focus on. We moved as quickly as we could, the storm still raging around us, but the light ahead was our beacon. We had to get there. I pushed forward, dragging Emma along with me. The light seemed to get brighter as we moved closer, and I could see the outline of the cabin now, the glow of a small fire flickering in the window. We were almost there. The sound of the motorcycles was still close, but I had to believe we could make it. We had to make it. We reached the cabin, the warmth from the fire glowing softly through the small window. My heart was still racing, my breath shallow from the cold and the constant fear of being caught. Emma's hand was tightly in mine, her small body trembling, not just from the storm but from everything that had happened. I could feel her fear, but I also felt the trust she had in me. She was following me, no questions, no complaints. We couldn't afford to stop, not yet, not with the motorcycles still out there, getting closer with each passing minute. I pushed open the door, and the hinges creaked loudly, breaking the silence of the night. The small room. Inside was dimly lit, the fireplace crackling in the corner, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It was a simple cabin, no luxuries, but it was a refuge. The door closed behind us, and I locked it quickly, glancing over my shoulder. The storm was still fierce outside, but we were safe, for now. I turned to Emma, who had followed me inside without question, her eyes wide but calm. I could see the exhaustion in her face, the weight of everything she had been through, but she was still standing. She was still with me. I kneeled down in front of her, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "You okay?" I asked softly. She nodded, though I could see the tremble in her lip. "We're safe now," I told her, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. I had no idea what was coming next, but I couldn't let her know that. She didn't need to carry that weight. Not yet. I stood up and walked to the window, peeking through the curtains. The rain was still coming down hard, the sound of the storm drowning out everything else. But I knew they were still out there, somewhere, looking for us. I wasn't sure how long we could stay here, but I had to believe we had a chance. I could feel the weight of my past pressing in on me. The Hells Angels had been my family, but now I was running from them, hiding, and I was dragging Emma into it. The guilt gnawed at me, but there was no turning back. Not now. Not when Emma was depending on me. I turned back to her, my mind racing with what came next. The cabin offered us shelter for now, but I couldn't let my guard down. I moved to the small table in the corner, running my fingers over the rough wood. I had no plan, no way of knowing what the future held. All I could do was protect Emma for as long as I could. The door to the cabin creaked again, and I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I turned quickly to Emma, who was standing by the window, her small face peeking through the curtain. "Don't open it," I whispered urgently. She nodded, stepping back from the window, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She didn't understand everything, and I wasn't sure how to explain it to her. She was just a kid. She shouldn't be in this mess. But there was no way out now. I had made the decision to protect her, and I was going to see it through. I walked over to the door, standing still, listening. The sound of the rain and wind filled the silence, but I could feel my heart pounding, every second dragging on as I waited. I wasn't sure if the motorcycles were still out there or if they had given up the chase, but I couldn't afford to take any chances. I was going to have to make a stand. For Emma. For both of us. I grabbed the rifle that had been left on the wall, checking to make sure it was loaded. I didn't know if I would need it, but I wasn't going to take any chances. We had made it this far, but I wasn't sure how much longer we could keep running. The door creaked again, and I held my breath, my hand tightening on the rifle. I was ready for whatever came next. The knob turned slowly, and the door inched open. My heart skipped a beat, but before I could move, a voice broke through the tension. "Jake!" It was Johnny. I let out a sigh of relief, my body relaxing as I lowered the rifle. Johnny stepped into the cabin, soaked through from the rain but alive. Behind him, 2 other riders from the Hells Angels stood, their faces grim but determined. "You're not alone," Johnny said, his voice low. "We're here to get you out." I stared at him for a long moment, trying to process everything that was happening. Johnny had been one of the few I had trusted, one of the few who had known I was walking away from the club. He had never pushed me, never tried to drag me back in. But now he was here. He was offering me a way out. I looked over at Emma, who had been standing quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold. I didn't know if she understood what was happening, but I knew I couldn't let her down. I had already made too many mistakes. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her. I nodded, my voice steady as I spoke. "Let's go." Johnny gave me a small nod, and I turned to Emma, holding out my hand. She took it without hesitation, her small fingers wrapping around mine as we walked toward the door. We had a chance now. We could leave. We could escape the past. And maybe, just maybe, we could find a way to make a future. Together.